just trying to get internet here. There we go. Just trying to get an agenda here on a screen. Do you have one? Yeah. All right. Welcome, everyone. Looks like we, other than a few new faces and faces showing up, no live. Okay, welcome. Everyone have a chance to look at the agenda?
Yep.
Okay, we're just looking for an approval.
I'll go ahead and motion to approve the agenda.
I'll go ahead and second that.
Bob first, Andy second. So, Mark, you want to start us on a vote? All right. Dave? Aye.
Spriggs, aye.
Palmer, aye.
Dinsmore, aye. Okay. Minutes. Everyone have a chance to look through those? I know we had a few, I found a few corrections and shoot out those, so. Any other corrections or comments on the minutes from last month? Okay, anybody got a motion?
I'll go ahead and motion to approve the minutes from October.
Saunders, I'll second that. Okay, so Andy first, David second. So, Todd, you want to start?
Spriggs, aye.
Palmer, aye.
Hauser, aye. Saunders, aye.
Dinsmore, aye. Okay. New business. Rick, are you on?
You'll be tired of listening to me tonight, but I'd hoped to get this sent out to you, but I got this item this morning, so it's fresh off the press. And I can't remember, early October, we had the Southwest Technical Task Force met. We meet typically twice a year, one before the summer season, one after the summer season, to kind of evaluate where we're at. And it's primarily reported by Rocky Mountain Power, who provides transmission service. So I just pulled some of the pages out, and we'll go over this relatively quickly. And some of this will even dovetail into the next agenda item. The peak for the Washington County area was 590 megawatts, which is actually slightly less than the 591 in 2021, which actually parallels what Washington City did. We were about 3/4 of a megawatt less this year than we were the previous year. And there's some slides in here that talks about that a little bit. This just kind of shows the load area that 590 includes. Is pretty much all of Washington County except for New Harmony, and actually extends down into Littlefield, which is on the Dixie system. So that and goes over to Colorado City and Hilldale area. So, hey, Greg. So that's just gives you an idea of the real estate that load represents. They had this table in here just showing the local generation in the area. The first three are the solar projects up in the Enterprise Valley. St. George has the Mill Creek and Red Rot in Bloomington. Hurricane has about 14.5 megawatts. Santa Clara, actually, they've added 2 units to theirs, and so they're about 9 megawatts now. The Vale project, this is the one that we're part of with UAMPS. We have our 3 units at 2 each. And then Deseret added 5 units in the Fort Pierce Industrial Park. Actually, it shows 5 right there. And that was a new addition to the county this year. So, and this just graphically since 2001, what the load for the county looks like. You know, we had those 2 really big steps between 19 and 20 and 2021, and then we're flat this last year, which is good and bad because I think it's kind of a hidden boomerang that we're going to see in upcoming years. And this is just from June 1st to the end of August, an hourly load profile. And you can see we didn't get up that high for many consecutive days this summer. The prediction or projection for next year is they really didn't. The projection for this year was about 625 roughly, and because of some of the weather things that we'll talk about, they decided just to leave the projection the way it was for next year. So we could have like I say, somewhat of a double year growth if we get back to normal temperatures. This is a chart that they include in all the reports that basically shows how close are we to the transformer capacity at the Central and Red Butte substations. And this would be for the LASA 1 unit. And the 570 represents the 2 UAMPS units at 285 each. And so they're showing that we should be okay. The 2026 is when the next transformer will be installed on the system. So they're just showing they can make it to that based on current. I thought I'd highlighted some stuff, but apparently it didn't make it in here. The key points that they showed for this last summer, it was an interesting summer. You know, it got hot. We had quite a few consecutive days over 100, but we really didn't see days over 110 like we have in years past. In fact, I don't think we had any over 110. And so that's where this statement here, and this is what I thought I had highlighted, that the average high temperature of 99.3 was the 3rd lowest in the 14 years that they've been doing this. So what that tended to do was suppress the peak load, even though anybody from this area drives around sees that we've got a lot of growth still going on. So, and then I'm trying to find it here. Like I say, I had it highlighted. During the minimum at night, the temperatures were actually higher than average at night. So it kind of increased. In our case, our peak was slightly less, but our kilowatt hour sales was actually higher. So it was kind of an interesting year in that regard. And this is their cooling degree days. It's a method to attempt to show how far off you are from normal. And again, over here, that's that 3rd lowest in the average high temperature. Now they showed the precipitation was higher. I don't remember that much rain at my house. Some of you may have got it, but it didn't happen at mine. And then these 2 charts are a little interesting. This is the number of hours that you were at 100 degrees, 101, etc. And you can, if you look really close, they tried to highlight this line. We're getting so many years in here, it's kind of hard to see. But this highlighted kind of purplish line was this last summer, and you can see it was definitely one of the lower, how do you say, a low high temperature type period. And then this is the number of days or number of hours over 110, 111, etc. And it looks like we had maybe 1 hour at 110 this year right here. And the little purple box doesn't show up in any of the higher temperatures. Where conversely, 2021, we had 4 or 5 hours, 114, almost 10 hours at 113. So although our loads didn't grow, with that temperature in mind, I think if we went to a normal year, we'd probably be 3 or 4, maybe 5 megawatts higher than we were last year. And then this is the number of consecutive days that we were over 100. And we're somewhat in the middle of the pack, not anywhere like 2020 or 2018. And interrupt me with any questions you might have. And this one's kind of an interesting graph that kind of shows a little bit of the effect of solar, and primarily those big ones up in Enterprise. So the gray line is we call it the gross load or the total load without generation in the county. The yellow one is the solar output from those big ones. So there must have been a cloud or something that come over right in here. And you can see the solar dips and the net load increases. And this is up there at Red Butte and Central transformers. And then the orange line is the St. George generation, and the green is the new Deseret generation. And let me see what else. Again, I just got this morning, so that's just kind of the stack between PacifiCorp, Deseret, and UAMPS of what the projections are for the next several years. So. Any questions on that? Say the next major project is going to be they'll convert one of the 4 lines to 345 operation and put a transformer at the St. George sub, which is up by the old dump up there as you go up, just about where the road pavement ends, north of the St. George Industrial Park. That's where all the power to the county comes in there. So, again, that's just kind of a backdrop of, so there's no significant problems noted nor anticipated. The component or the system asset that's probably the closest to having issues is the line from St. George sub to the Purgatory sub. It was just under its capacity this last summer, and so we're working on some contingency to shift some load off of that. We have 2 substations on that feed, so one of them, we might move one over to the other side. So, but Rocky Mountain's going to move some load, and Dixie was going to shift some load initially. So, our contribution to that relief is we typically run our generations during those peak time, and so does Hurricane. So that's just kind of an update of kind of the county system in general. So you ready for the less fun one?
This can't be more. I mean, it was cooler.
Yeah, well, I did try to prep you last month, but to be quite honest, I was totally shocked when I got our September bill, so it was even better than I thought, or worse. And so the purpose of this next one is to kind of outline what happened, where we're at, what the options are. And I would hope that you could I'll be making basically the same presentation to the council next week at the council meeting. And hopefully we can provide them with some recommendations of how we might want to go forward on what happened this last summer as far as wholesale power costs, the power cost adjustment, and then possible use of the rate stabilization fund. So here we go. Basically, this is a recap of what I just talked about, that our load was about the same during July and August. We didn't have a lot of the consecutive days over. We didn't really didn't get above 110. And the wholesale power prices were pretty much where we had expected. During peak hours, between 100 and 200 has become somewhat of the norm now during that period of time. And actually, if I summed up the two, I think July I was a little bit under budget and August a little bit over. The net result, we were really close to what I'd budgeted for those 2 months. Then we had that first week in September. And I'm sure everybody, hopefully you remember, it's been a little while ago, but the first 10 to 12 days, it was really hot here, especially for first part of September. Our peak load for September was 50.3 megawatts, which was less than a megawatt away from what our July peak is. And normally we're about in the 40, 41 megawatt range, so significantly higher than what we've seen, which is the next bullet item there. And because that's how our normal loads go, the amount of power that we've done through power purchases and stuff, it drops off come September 1st. I mean, not completely, but it's less than July and August. So between the excessive heat and the lower resources that we had normally, it created a higher market exposure that we were during those peak times. And then they referred to it as a heat dome covering basically the entire western United States. And I think that's one of the things that really affected the pricing, is because there was no cool spot and hot spot like there was throughout the rest of the summer. Basically everybody was hot, the loads were up everywhere. In fact, I'm sure you may have saw in California, they asked people not to charge their electric vehicles in the afternoon, and they ramped up some natural gas generation that is quasi mothballed to try to keep things on. And the Western Interconnect, they experienced an all-time system peak in that first week of September. Again, very unusual timing. UAMPS did as well. So this is UAMPS peak. You can see there's one thing that doesn't match, and that's this here. So UAMPS set an all-time system peak in September, which resulted in basic supply and demand. Demand goes up, the supply really hasn't changed, and so it resulted in multiple afternoons and evening hours that sometimes went over $1,000 a megawatt hour, which is $1 a kilowatt hour. Keep in mind we're selling it between 8 to 15 cents, so not a good formula there. And this is just what our monthly peak loads have looked like over the last 5 complete years. And sixth year is up to October. And again, you can see that unusual peak for September right here. So this is a slide that I got from UAMPS, and so this is the average spot market prices over the summer, and you can see it goes from June 1st to mid-September. And you can see that June, July, and August were pretty much what was expected, bouncing up and down, peaks up in the mid 100s. Sometimes, you know, we had a couple days there, 3, but you can see there are pretty narrow spikes. But then that September event hit, and it just went crazy. And the other challenge is it wasn't just for an hour or two on one day. It was multiple days. Again, you can see real quick, there's 5 days right there of over 900 on several hours.
Rick, is there not something that keeps them from price gouging us like this? Like, we just have no choice.
Correct. Yeah, there isn't any, you know, the market has been determined to be a free market system. And so if you're short, which we are, at this point in time, there's not a whole lot you can do. The only other thing we could have done is to curtail loads, turn people off and rotate it through. And I don't think that would go over very well either. So unfortunately, like our pre-purchases and stuff, we usually make those in January, February. So outguessing those becomes a real challenge. So this last summer, we've had the 3 highest power bills on record. July was about 2.2 million, August 2.3, and September was just under 2.7. And the October prices have moderated back to a little closer to normal, but they still are probably $10 to $15 during the afternoon higher than what they have been historically in October. So there's not a lot of positive signs that this
So
trend
what
is
was
gonna continue.
expected in September?
Our budget, or our power bill last September was 1.2 million. I budgeted 1.5. So I increased it 25%, and then this happened. So that's kind of why we're having this discussion tonight. And this is our blended wholesale power costs for that same period of time, basically 6 years. And you can see this year has just flat out been crazy different than the previous 5. With that really big spike in August, I expect it to come back down in October. Probably in the 10 cents range, plus or minus a little bit. So what does that mean for the power department? And really, and both of these protections were put in place before I was involved. So I got to thank my predecessor and city management that did these things to help protect us. The first one, well, I guess the first one time-wise was really they established that rate stabilization fund in 2010. And then in 2017, I think you were the only one here at the time, is when they did the last major cost of service rate study. They implemented a power cost adjustment. And we'll go into a little more detail. And I think it's important that you guys understand how that works, why it's there. And these kind of events are why both of these are here. So the power cost adjustment And if you go back to this graph, you see this pink line of this 0.0711. So when the rates were established in that base rate for all the different categories, they included basically the 7.11 cents in that base rate. And that's what that pink or purple line was intended on that other graph. And so the PCA is calculated on a monthly basis. It can be either positive or negative. Believe it or not, 2 years ago, it was negative. And the PCA is based on the rolling average of the previous 12 months power costs. So you take the total dollars divided by the total number of kilowatt hours purchased for those previous 12 months. That gives you your average for that 12-month period. So you get the next month. So this next month will roll off September from last year and include this September, if that makes sense. So it's just the last 12 months. And so the PCA is the difference between that rolling average and that 0.0711. It's a simple, you do that, you subtract it, and what there. And the last bullet point, and we'll talk a little more, the PCAs aren't intended to generally recover large percentages of your costs. You know, it's tended to moderate what goes on in there. So this is what the PCA, again, over those same periods have looked like. And again, the December on the right for the next year, then it will loop around to the January on the following. And this little green line back in 2020, it actually went negative for a couple months. Not a lot, but it did a little bit. And then you can see in 21, it started to increase a bit, a little over a cent, and then it kind of stayed there. And then when it got up to around 1.5 cents, I met with Jeremy, we talked about it, and we felt like, well, is this a short-term problem or a long-term? And so we made the decision for May, June, and July and August to keep it at 1.5. That's why this says 2022 charged versus the calculated. And then this last month, when we got that huge power bill, we bumped it up to 2.5, but by calculation, it should be about 3.3. And we'll talk and hopefully get some direction from you and the council. If that's something that we still want to continue to entertain, and that's basically what's on this slide. That's what I just explained, that we met, felt like over the summer we'd try to limit it, but what that does is it means you're under collecting based on what your wholesale power costs are. And so you're defeating a little bit of what the PCA was intended to do by doing that. We do monitor the amount that's collected through the PCA, if it's if we're ahead of where we should be or behind. Going into that summer, we were actually ahead a little bit, and so that's one of the reasons why we held it at that 1.5. But that's been used up, and we're slightly behind now on that.
Is that, so just so I understand,
Go ahead.
so the PCA, I mean, is that just like a reserve account that we have, or is those additional, that additional cost get passed on to us as consumers? I mean, I guess help me
Well,
get my head around a little bit with.
I mean, eventually, yes, it's going to be paid for by the customers. The PCA, because of how we do it, so we're calculating it based on the previous 12 months, but we're using that number and charging it for the last month that we have. So there's a timing difference in there that creates some of those positives and negatives. So over time, if it went like previously, that shortfall that we have now would be made up and taken care of, so. But it's not a line item on the city budget, it's just, it gets tracked in a big spreadsheet, so.
So where we get hurt is not being able to see what's gonna happen in the future. And then when we miscalculate on the front end and have something like September hit.
Mhm.
So we agree to buy it in January, February. And what we agree to purchase at that point, we're obligated to purchase. And that's all we have access to. And then if we don't have enough power, then we have to go on the market and purchase it at whatever it's being
Yes, let
offered
me
at.
see if this slide might help. And this wasn't for September. This is stuff that we're working on for, Jake's helping me to try to see if we can refine this a little better. And so these different graphs or lines are minimum days, maximum days, and projections and different things. But basically the 24 hours of the day is broken into two periods, one called the high load, which was from 8 o'clock to 11 o'clock at night. And then there's the low load period for the other 8 hours. And so we have different resources that basically, and they're all listed down here at the bottom, that we talk about pretty much every month. And so they get more or less stacked on top of each other. So you have this nice, cute little load curve, and we're trying to fill it with these kind of clunky blocks, and it makes it a bit of a challenge. And so we didn't really get hurt on what we'd purchased in January. Where we got hurt in September was what we have to buy on the open market is the area between the top of the block and where that curve ends up. And if you got, so at that time, because our loads were still much higher than normal and our resources went down, there are hours that were 20 megawatts short. And if you're $1,000 a megawatt hour, that's $20,000 an hour. And that adds up really fast. So it's this wide area, if you will, between where our resource stack is and our actual load is really what caught us.
And Rick, are we able to negotiate earlier in the year about, hey, if we have to go on market, I mean, is there any way we could, so it's not so significant if we have one of those months next year? Are you able to negotiate that earlier in the year? A particular price? Is that-
Yes, we're working on that. Let me show you this one. I anticipated a few of these questions, so.
You're
This
good.
is not the actual final numbers, but this is one of the indices that's recognized for the next 12 months. Look what next summer looks like. It's definitely better than 1,000. But the ones that what we bought last year was 190, and we thought that was crazy high. So, and we can budget for this, but again, the part of the point here is there's not a lot of, I mean, you can't just go, I had a customer call and says, well, why don't you just go buy some of that cheap coal? It's not available. I would love to buy some cheap coal if I could get my hands on it, but so, and part of, there's a few other things that we'll chat about too. So that's kind of how that happened, is those high, even though it was only a third of the month, you put those numbers together, it goes really fast. And again, if it was 1 or 2 days, 3 or 4 hours, it wouldn't do, but this was extended multiple days, multiple hours that just again, just wasn't normal for September. So kind of put the PCA over here for just a second. And then the other one, protection that the city's has in place is the rate stabilization fund, which was set up primarily for this exact scenario. And it was started in 2010. And the way the document reads, at the end of each year, for round numbers, say the department makes or has a margin of $1 million, then they'd put 25% of that into this rate stabilization fund and kind of earmark it, set it aside. So they'd do that. And so that's been going on for a little over 10 years. It's capped at 2.5 million or the sum of the 3 highest bills, which this last summer would put us well over 7 million that cap more or less bumped up to. Our current balance is 4.1.
So it's basically a savings account.
Correct. And it's saying, and there's 2 other funds that come out of that. There's a resource, basically development fund, and a system, I want to say maintenance, that I don't think is the right term, but there's 3 other funds and they have their own percentages too that get put away. And to my knowledge, the city's never utilized or touched those funds since this was started. And so this would be the first time. And so
I think we did when we had to do the repair coming down the hill.
oh, okay, that would make sense. And again,
That's when we got in the danger, and that's when we started looking at this.
okay. Yeah, I was on the consulting side of the aisle at that point in time. But so the good news is the city put some protections in, but they're short-term fixes. It can't, we can't maintain that level of hit. So this is kind of where I'd like to get some feedback, and if you feel comfortable, make a recommendation to the council. So 2 things on the PCA. Actually, let me back up or go to one of the things that we've done since, and this has all been within the last week and a half that we've had this last bill. We have contracted with UFS to begin a new cost of service and rate study for us that will take this into account, give us some advice of, going forward. And the kickoff meeting for that scheduled for November 14th that we just made today. So that's, I'm guessing we'd have that rate study probably February, Marchish, in that time frame. It's going to take a little bit of time to get through that. So 2 questions, and is, again, and it was a decision Jeremy and I made together to try to hold the PCA lower than the calculated value. Is that something that we would want to continue until we get the rate study completed? And basically what I'm expecting the rate study to do is it's gonna move the base rates up to basically incorporate what the current PCA is in, and then we'll start off with a new PCA that's roughly around 0, if that makes sense.
You say you're starting that analysis on the 14th of November?
That's our first kickoff meeting, yeah.
And how long does it take to determine their findings?
Like I say, I would expect somewhere after the first of the year, and then by the time we get through, the power board process and the council process, it'll probably be February, March, in that time frame. We'd like to implement it before. You don't want to do it on the July bill. That just adds insult to injury on that. So that's our goal. And they were real accommodating, and I'm fairly sure they're getting lots of calls from people. I've talked to other cities. I don't know if Misery Loves Company, but all the ones I've talked to, UAMPS, are in similar boats if they were short on resources, which most are. And so I'd like your feedback or thought. Again, what that does is it basically means we're under collecting what the PCA was intended to do.
Is that, the under collecting, is that based on, like right now for this month, are we low? I mean, is the bill gonna come in higher than what you projected it to be, or where you projected it now? Is it corrected on us?
I certainly hope we're not as far off, but I would expect it will probably be a little higher. And there's, again, other reasons for that. By this time, when we prepared the budget, the Enchant project was supposed to be online at about between $30 and $40 a megawatt hour. When I get to the UAMPS report, that project's gone. And so there's a perfect storm on a lot of things, to be quite honest. That's not trying to make an excuse. That's just what happened. And so right now, in this current bill that was sent out, we had it at 2.5, and like say, I'd have to look at the exact number, but it's like 3.3 is where it should be if you did it by pure calculation. And so that's the difference between these two.
So what is, just rough, what is the difference of what we're off? How much is going out of that fund? Are we saying 200,000 a month is what they're short, or $1 million short?
For this upcoming month, I think you'd be more in the 100, 200 range. Again, September's,
Would you think that's gonna continue through January?
I would suspect it'll have that similar trend.
But
Just
in
because-
September, we were $1 million.
Right, the September is even a super fluke on what the load was. The pressures now, I mean, our loads are back pretty close to what we normally expect this time of year. But the power prices are a little higher. And there's a couple other fun things in the UAMPS report I'll report on as well. So.
Also in 22, we had the Texas freeze that also did the same kind of a thing to us too. Just didn't last as long.
Correct. Yeah, it was a much shorter duration animal. So, and that's going to be the reality of the power market in the West as they retire. Again, I'm kind of jumping around a bit. This was from our last UAMPS meetings. This was a presentation by the Western Electric Coordinating Council representative. This is the retirements in the next few years. There's over 6,000 megawatts of coal slated to be retired in 2025. So you see a graph like this, and he did say there are a lot of solar projects coming online, but again, they're not equivalent type resources. And so as time goes on, and I think we've had that discussion in the past, the whole market and the whole systems, and you see California, they are spending a lot of money to try to get the Diablo nuke plant to stay online for a longer period of time, because they're finally seeing the writing on the wall. This isn't working. But in the meantime, 2026 has a trigger, and I don't know all the details on coal, has to put on certain levels of pollution. I think that's why you see so many retiring before that requirement hits. And that's not going to help. The drought isn't helping. So we're not getting the hydro out of the dams like you normally would. So again, the resources are down and the demand goes up, and the prices go. We got some slides on that. So let me ask this next question, then we'll go to those and then maybe come back to this slide. And then on the rate stabilization fund, again, this is the type of scenario that it was designed to deal with. And should some of it be used, and if so, how much? Jeremy and I have talked, would recommend that consider at least authorizing the use. And we can evaluate it as we get closer to the end of the fiscal year, but authorizing up to about 1.5 million use of that. Because that would cover September and then give us a little bit to work with on the other months as well. And again, if we don't need to use it, we won't.
What's the balance on that one again?
4.1.
Okay, that's what I thought.
So it's roughly about 25% of it. And that 4.1 is before they're working through the audit with the finance department. So that's as of the end of fiscal year 2021. There'll probably be a little bit more that goes into that from fiscal year 22. But they've got to get through the audit period, and then Brian does his magic over there.
But that can be used to whatever the city needs. So for us as a power department, or the power board, we can see what our needs are, but I mean, I would think that Jeremy and you and the city council's in a better position to see where that would best be allocated.
And that is earmarked specific for this event.
Power.
Yes. So it's not available to any of the other. And I
Okay.
guess the council could decide and say, well, we're not going to really use it like that. We're going to do it some other way, but I don't.
Okay, I
foresee that.
misunderstood. I thought.
But no,
that
it's
was-
tagged specifically for this type of event within the power department budget. Like I say, there are other accounts that have reasonable amounts in there as well. Yeah. So let's maybe look at these and then come back to that.
So before you go there, that last note of there are practical limits to using those options. Did we discuss those? I don't know.
Yeah, well, and I guess on that is, if we under collect on the PCA, you're basically going to use up savings, whether it's called the rate stabilization fund or the other cash that we have on hand, because you're going to under collect, and so it'll just chew into that. And then obviously we've got the $4 million to use, and we can't do that on a perpetual basis because it would be gone. And so that's why we jumped on it, wanted to get the rate study done and evaluate, what they recommend in the future, and then that'll come back to both bodies for discussion. So that's what I meant by that is
That makes sense.
we
more clear.
can't
Sorry.
continue to do this on a year after year basis. We need to address it, even though it may be painful and not popular. Nobody likes to pay more. I think we've all experienced that in the last few years. So, but we've got to make sure the department's fiscally sound as well. So you ask about what our options are. Short-term, long-term contracts. I would anticipate that we're looking into some of both. Each summer we've always, since I've been here, bought an amount. But you can see what the pricing is. And the challenge somewhat with that is, which one? So if we buy a bunch to say, hey, I don't want to be exposed to that here. So say we buy another, in this case, what is that, 6 megawatts to get up to here. So this would be all the way. Well, I can't buy it just for those hours. I got to buy it clear over to here. And so I've got all these. Now I've got to hope I can sell it for at least break even. So that becomes a bit of a challenge of where to try to hit that mark. Is
Rick,
because you're buying it in these clunky blocks.
have you looked at? I mean, this was a big hit, the $1 million, but are we gonna, in long term, does it make sense just to buy? Like, I look at, maybe we should buy in the medium and have some excess power that we just can't get rid of, versus having to pay these high prices that I don't think are going away. So I'm just wondering if there's something in the middle that we buy a little bit more on all of them.
Yeah.
And not, because it looks on that graph like we're just hitting the bare bottom and then risking it at the top end of everything. I just don't know what the plus and minuses are on that. So it's just, is there somewhere in the medium that,
Yeah, we might,
Power that we don't need.
and we might,
Back on the open market, we can only sell it for 100. We still lose 90.
but I think
Yeah.
Craig's point is, Bud is losing the 90 on those hours offset the hit on those.
on the high end, on the other end, I just don't know what the plus or minuses are for that.
And again, and I'm an engineer by trade, so this feels more like stock market stuff, and it drives me bonkers.
And will this study help us determine that better what we should buy?
Not so much on that. That's, again, Jake and I are working to try to develop a little more month by month.
So we're talking about significant money here. Is there any, I mean, should we look at maybe beefing up our own generation, what we can do as far as our own generation? Because it seems like we could do quite a bit internally with that much money.
Correct. No, that's bottom, or this bullet point right here. That's a consideration. So we've got a few things going on.
Read, sorry.
Well,
I should just read it. I'm sorry.
No, you're great, and I appreciate it because I've been working on this, and Jeremy and I went back and forth, and I would have liked to have had this in your hand, but the council will have it ahead of time. So these are the various options: short and long-term contracts. The advantage of those is they're quick. We can, even if we don't like the price, it become, and I think to your point is a known higher price than what you'd like to pay better than totally unknown and totally exposed? And I think it's trying to find that balance. UAMPS has done a solicitation for interest on another natural gas project somewhat similar to Nebo, or to put generators in similar to ours in various cities. They got interest of like 150 megawatts like that. There's a study that's kicking off, or is under, we should have results back by the end of the year on geothermal options. I honestly don't see that being a big solution. You might pick up a megawatt or two. They have some proposals they're evaluating, more solar with and without batteries. So the battery would help us. Basically, you're robbing it from when you don't need it and shifting it. And there's also a project evaluating expanding the Horse Butte wind. Wind, I'm not as big a fan, because like today, it's great. It's been blowing like crazy, but when this was going on, it was crickets. We got nothing out of either one of the wind projects. So the solar to me is better, because at least I know when the sun's up, I'm gonna get something. And then the other is adding generating capacity to our existing facility. We have slots for 5 more units out there. And we've started preliminary discussions of looking into because our air permit's only for the 3 units we have. So you got to do the air permits, you got to do work with Rocky Mountain. So the bottom line is, to get a physical new resource, you're probably 2 to 5 years out. We talked to Cat last week. If we ordered a new unit, it just says we want one, it said about 24 months before we would see it. So we've got kind of that problem. We got an immediate need, and that goes back to the shorter and longer term contracts. We have an immediate need, particularly for this upcoming summer. Because what we do have coming up is 1 megawatt, and I'll take anything I can from Red Mesa that will still on schedule for first part of 2023. So that'll be there for next summer. The Steel Solar, which is where we'll have our biggest next jump in resource, about 6-7 megawatts, which would help a lot. As we've talked before, it was delayed. We got word last month that they're still having, Longi's still having trouble getting their panels through US Customs. They have to prove that every last piece of material wasn't used, no slave labor or child labor was used. And so they've got to convince them. So the project's ahead of Steel Solar, their panels are there, and they can't get them through. And so they said, well, that might be a couple more months, which wouldn't be super big as long as we can get it on for the summer. We've got the CFPP, but there's issues we'll talk about with that, and it's still another 7 years out. So again, the Enchant project, which was the coal plant with carbon capture, we're planning on 4 megawatts there. That was originally planned on coming on in September, which would have been really nice to have. The negotiations with the new owners to the old owners fell apart, so they basically can't get the asset, and so therefore they can't, do anything with it. So that project died on us. Muddy Creek, which was a heat recovery similar to what we have at Vail. Kern River, in the negotiations, started requiring things that, well, the way they put it at the meeting was it would make the project unfinanceable and uninsurable. So that project died. And then Photosol was an older solar one that also went the way. So we've, you try to plan, and sometimes obviously things didn't work out. And then the last item there, the droughts, even though I've said it before, we don't get a lot directly out, but it affects the power prices dramatically because that generation isn't there. They're running about half right now, and it can look even grimmer depending on what prediction you want to believe for the Colorado River. So with that good news,
I read this weekend BYU came up with a nuclear reactor. Maybe we gotta jump in on that.
yeah, and it was going to do it for 3 cents. So
So when you say solar with and without battery, are you talking individual homes? Are you talking, what are you
no,
talking?
this would
You
be a
talking
big utility
plants?
scale, kind of like
Any
steel.
benefit as far as offering type of incentives for new construction or something to go into solar with battery? Larger developments like this one that's coming on. Isn't there one that Mike talked about last month?
Oh, there is an apartment complex that will have them on each unit.
Yeah, that sounds like that might help with an immediate need, but is that not the case? Or is that too little?
Well, from an administrative standpoint, like right now we have roughly 300 solars, and most of them are between 5 and 10. There's some a little bigger, some a little less. So is it easier to manage 300 or one contract? So the net result is basically the same as far as, and then I honestly, we don't have any insight of what they're really doing. Are they going to be there? Are they not? How are they maintaining their systems? I mean, there's no protection. Most of these other contracts have minimum guarantees. So I guess if people want to sign up and say, we're gonna do an equivalent guarantee, that might be something to look into, but. And the people that are putting those on, I mean, I know you're one of them.
We have it, and I can
it
tell
does
that
help.
I'm generating more power than what I'm using, yet the buyback for this, from the city is not very good. I mean, is there?
And the
I'm
rate
just wondering if
study
there's more
should help
incentives.
address that. That's one of the things we'll look at. And again, it really, there's no easy little simple silver bullet that solves all the problems. So, kind of all of the above. So what are your thoughts on the PCA? Should we hold it like we've done for the last few months? Should we just let it run where it's supposed to be? Thoughts?
Well, the PCA, it seems to me, it's a complete guess anyways. So, I mean, when you guessed it, keeping it at 1.5,
Well,
it was okay. I
well,
don't know.
it's, I wouldn't say that it's, this was an attempt to minimize the impact primarily to the customers, particularly when it was just slightly above that. It didn't seem, but when this took off on us, again, it's not sustainable to, so the PCA is partially recovering what it was intended to do, but not completely.
But it was based on the fact that in 2017, differences were real small pennies, and now they're,
Right.
this last year, it's jumped. I mean, you can see the 6 years there, that it's just right there, so that, yes, we knew money would come out, but we figured
Right.
50, 100 may be recovered over the next 3 months.
And so as far as calculating what the PCA amount should be, there's no guesswork at all on that. I mean, I plug in the numbers and it spits it out. And that's historically what we've always done. This is the first time we've done anything different. And again, the hope was that would be a short-term deal and come back in line, and then we'd be okay, but.
That jump started after the fires and all the repercussions from the fires. Legislation had to throw into the industry.
Yeah, there's,
Last year, July, May, June.
that's really where, it was about a year. And again, it was somewhat tolerable, but then it just went
Well,
crazy.
my point is that you were right on the money for the first 4.5 months of the year, right?
Well, that's because we just used that calculation.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so if it calculated out
It's gonna calculate right now, it's gonna calculate it over 3.
correct. Yeah, and it's like 3.3 is what it technically should be. So that's the question. Should we continue to try to artificially keep the impact down, or just let it go by calculation where it should be?
How hard of a hit is that to us as the consumer?
Well, say 3 cents. So every 1,000 kilowatt hours, it's going to be $30. Our average residential during the summer is about 1,500. We have an interesting city. I think we've got quite a bit that are big and quite a bit that are smaller. So the average comes in and looks pretty typical, but you've got 2 ends of the spectrum there. And so like say, so every 10 cents, it's $10, or excuse me, every cent is $10, 1,000 kilowatt hours. So depending on, if you're the average user, the 3 cents would be $45. If you're,
On the stable, the plan.
I honestly don't, I'd have to ask Carrie on that. Again, it helps their payments, but it doesn't change what they're being charged.
We
Right.
can see it because it won't get affected until January.
Till
when they
January.
Negotiate
Right.
the
Right.
next year, so they won't even know that this is gonna affect them.
Well, if they don't pay attention, they won't know. I mean, it's on every bill. But,
I mean,
so, yeah,
but the rates are set, isn't it January to January that they adjust?
I think
that?
so. Okay.
So is that a permanent hit monthly, or is that a temporary thing that over this next year will
Well,
kind of?
because of how that rolling average works, so the next one coming up will be October. We won't get the October bill until 25th of this month. So if October of this year average cost is higher than last October, the PCA will go up. If it's less, it will come down slightly, so. But unfortunately, I'm not seeing that it's
Come down.
Right.
gonna come down.
Well, it almost seems to me like there needs to be some type of an adjustment.
And the major adjustment will come when we have the rate study. And so that's gonna, they'll come in and say, we think your new residential rate shall be X and the commercial Y and large commercial Z, and
Hoping by next March, April, spring
Yeah.
of next year.
that's my goal.
So this will take the use of it will be immediate. It'll be something that we see. We decide to back this, then
The PCA
yeah.
calculation,
So it'll be an immediate impact on the.
yes.
What would you recommend, Rick, if we, I mean, if we decided to make any adjustments?
I would at least keep it at the 2.5 and maybe even consider going to 3 if you're not wanting to use the calculation. I don't want this distance to get too far apart. And then on the use of the rate stabilization fund, again, I think our recommendation would authorize up to 1.5 million out of that 4.1.
Now, on the rate stabilization fund, that's been in place how long?
Since 2010.
So it's been 12 years and you've built up 4.1 million
Mhm.
to the positive based
Right.
upon a 25% contribution on your overages on.
Well, it's just basically, if our revenue is 10 million and our expenses are 9, that gives you $1 million
And so
profit,
that,
if you
then
will, if
that
it was
year
a,
would have been $250,000 going into the
Exactly.
fund. And so historically, I mean, if you're just gonna go straight line, 4 million over 12 years is,
I'm not sure if that's correct. I thought when we did it in 2017, that rate stabilization fund was almost gone. And that's why we had.
and you're probably right.
That's why we had, so I think the 4 has been raised since
so
2017, since 2017.
so it's more like a 5-year window.
Yes,
So,
and so obviously we've been collecting a little bit more because we had to build that fund back up.
so that's
because
about 800,000.
That's a great historical perspective but you're right, that's probably was the reason for that 2007.
They determined we had to set the rates to that so we could withstand what was going on in the market and be able to build that fund back up to where it's supposed to be, from what I understand the state regulations.
There isn't a regulation that I'm aware of as far as having a rate stabilization fund. That's something the city did. There are requirements for bonding that you have to recoup so much to make sure you can pay your bonds back.
Be able to stay
Yeah.
higher grades.
Yep. Yeah, so I mean, think of it as,
I think when you're thinking of 4.12, it's actually the 4
So it's a much
Plus
higher
six.
number. So in the last 5 years, it's about $800,000 that's been added to the stabilization. fund.
and it depends on the year.
This year, there'll be nothing. In all likelihood.
Well, yeah, I mean,
You're $1.2 million over in September to the negative, right?
We're using it, yeah.
on that line item of the
On that
budget,
line item.
there's other things
Oh, yeah,
going
there's
on,
the
so.
cost of the system, there's everything involved.
Correct,
but
correct.
In general,
Right.
we've been lucky for 5 years since you set it, or 2017 when it reset, would make sense to me that the whole function of that thing was to take care of what you're facing right now.
And part of the reason I think that it's been able to accumulate at a relatively decent pace was because of the PCA, because that was automatically accounting for some of those variations. And so, yeah.
I guess
So
we
the
need
fund's
to-
been there since 2010, but it's not necessarily, the net result of those 12 years is where we're at. I can't tell you the gory details in between.
I guess we need to decide whether September was really a huge anomaly and something that, you know, I mean, we haven't seen it happen like that for a while. Are we making permanent decisions now based on something that is more than likely not going to happen again? Or do we think that, I mean, we've seen a lot of changes in the weather and fires and everything. So I would probably anticipate we're going to see more of these, but still it wasn't an anomaly, I think.
This is by far the worst in the 5 years that I've been here. I mean, again, we've had a day or two here and there with some nasty spikes and those kind of things, but not with that duration. And in the meantime, we're still growing.
Yeah.
So basically, any new customers that come on, you've got to go find resources to serve them. There's no cheap resources to serve them. So
Those
it has
issues
kind of
will affect us even more as we grow.
yes.
Now, if you look at the political climate, I don't think we see immediate relief within at least the next 2 to 2.5 years, if even that. And that's the other factor that kind of plays into it that that Rick obviously doesn't have any control over.
Can you go back to that graph?
Which, this one? So up until this point, we've always just used the calculated value. That's why they're the same. And this was just trying to illustrate what we attempted to do. And
Oh, you look at that. I agree with Dick, right? And what he's saying is that is there for us to do this with. I think September, well, it is hard to calculate or forecast in the future, and I don't know if there's a way to hire a consultant to come in and forecast for us that way, to look at that, because there's a lot of factors that could happen over this next year or two, not just locally or nationally, but internationally as well, that are going to affect that have affected that really, you almost need somebody, a specialist like that, to come in and do that. And
So is it based on 1.5 normally, or is it 2? The calculation.
well, the calculation, if the power cost was always at this average, this 0.0711, the PCA would be 0.
Right.
So it just,
Question to ask is, we go back to 0.071, where's the new norm up above?
to be honest, I think, again, because you're gonna drop off the previous whatever month it is and replace it with the new one, I think we're gonna see this kind of flatten. Or I'm hoping it doesn't stay on this steeper curve, but I think it'll,
but we
fine.
likely won't see it come back down a lot.
not for a while, because this September hit, it's gonna be with us for 12 months.
Yeah.
Because it's not intended to try to recover it in 1 month, it's trying to recover it over a longer period.
Okay.
Because otherwise, that PCA would be 25 cents
Okay.
instead of 3 cents. So does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so this is trying, by doing it that way, it dampens it out.
Right.
But that
Yeah.
really bad month is gonna stay with us for 12 months.
12 months.
And it's gonna,
Rate study comes in, which we have to assume costs are gonna stay high. They're gonna obviously they try to give you a good idea on.
Right, and if you remember, we had them look at it last year, and the recommendation was, okay, well, we're keeping an eye on it. We'll be okay, which,
That's what's happening.
you know, that study was done back in this period. And
Good old days.
so I would suspect, I mean, what you're gonna have happen is your rates are here, your PCA's here, it's gonna do this. And then this is gonna go back to, it'll get reset to zero if we've set our new rates right. And then that whole process will start all over again.
Well, I think Dick's right on the other fund that we were talking about.
rate.
It makes sense to me to use that million or whatever we decide now because, like you said, that's what it's there for. That's the reason it was created. And there's been some pretty significant growth in 5 years. So, I personally think that that's a good part of the solution at this point.
I want to go back to my same answer too. Sorry, Mike.
Well, and I was just gonna say, so you know you're gonna have to use 1.2 of it. We're guessing rate study is gonna be at least till March. So even if you're 200,000 or 100,000, that puts you at 1.8, and you only said 1.5. So do we need to go a little higher than authorizing a 1.5 or a 1.8 or 2? Is that what, you see what I'm saying?
Well, it's how much latitude, I guess. I mean, there's nothing that would prevent coming back and saying, hey, we thought this is where we're going. You know, this is obviously something we need to watch very, very closely.
So what I was going to say is in
so there isn't
the
any-
long term. Go ahead.
I say there isn't any reason why we couldn't, I don't want to have this discussion again if things go worse than what I anticipate, but.
I think we should remain open to that. But what I was going to say is, in agreeing with this, it's also, I think it's important to note that we look forward, looking at it as maybe, and maybe I should play the devil's advocate or say I'm playing the devil's advocate here as a lay consumer who hasn't been sitting in on these meetings, who's getting hit with a bill over the next 12 months for September, and then getting hit with a rate hike shortly after, or in January, I guess. Is when
But
it would take
your
effect.
net result would be the same. Does
Right.
that make sense?
And I'm okay with that as a consumer. So the next places I'm going is how are we forward looking or forward thinking in terms of handling those resources? And I like the idea of getting that next generator put in there, that next resource of ours put in there. What is the cost on that?
Generator, last information we had was a little over a year ago, was around $3 million for one unit.
And how are the current resources that we have in terms of longevity and the life of those and where
The current generators?
we'll have to replace any of that or
I mean, they're, what, 7, 8 years old, so any mechanical device, you're gonna start having some. We've had a few things this last summer, but this last summer actually was one of our better runs. Some of the other things we're looking at is a pre-purchase of gas. So we have that become more of a known for those units. Jake sent that request out this morning. So as far as our units, I'm not too stressed at the maintenance. And we actually have a maintenance fund that is part of how those units were funded through UAMPS that's building up there that we could
it's
draw on.
maintenance as opposed to complete replacement of those units.
We're a
Unless
long ways away from,
something
right,
happens.
I mean, was it it was either Santa Clara or Hurricane had a bearing go out on a generator, and then it went and the rotor hit the stator, and I think that was last year. That would be a catastrophic one, but, you know, short of that and normal maintenance, I don't anticipate anything major.
Rick, along those lines with Mark, had we had that additional generator, how would that have mitigated this spike in September? What would one generator do to?
Well, it's roughly 2 megawatts, and so at $1,000, it's about $2,000 an hour savings. Well, you have to back out a little bit because you got to put fuel in it and stuff like that. But at those levels, the fuel become pretty small. So again, it's one of those fun hindsights that you know. Good thing we had the 6 we did. The 6 megawatts. It's good that for that September we bought the 190, but you can always, well, we should have bought another 10. Well, you can see on all those charts, everything. I would say September is definitely a very unlikely anomaly unless the weather situation. If you can outguess that, I would love it because that would help a lot. And so you got that going on. You got the war in Ukraine affecting natural gas prices. You got, do I spend $3 million on a generator that Congress could say it's only good for 5 years and then you have to be clean? And then now you got a $3 million boat anchor. That's part of the fun thought process.
I like the idea of becoming more self-sufficient.
Mhm.
Not that we can be completely self-sufficient, but at least somewhat more self-sufficient. And then I really like Todd's suggestion in terms of incentives for people to look at that.
We can
for
talk with the rate
consumers
consultant, what he's
to
seen,
think
and
more
recommend.
seriously about that power and what it can do, that generation that we could, I'd be more apt to go for it if that was the case as a consumer, if it was truly making more of an impact on my community and
Mhm.
you know,
Okay, good.
great suggestions that way.
So,
I know what you want. Any other comments, questions? No. So are you wanting to stay at the 1.5, 1.5 on the?
I would say at least the 2.5 to 3 range on the PCA. I don't think we should go backwards on that.
And the average consumer would probably be around $35-40 a month is
Yeah.
what they would see.
And I guess the good news, these months, the usage should be less and
Yeah, that's the
quite as impactful, but
I think maybe 2.5. I don't know. It's hard to, like you said, we're gonna pay for it either way.
right. I mean, the costs are gonna come through. I mean,
Then we're looking at 1.5 with the rate stabilization fund. Is that correct? What were we?
yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Okay.
Increasing it by 1.5, increasing 1.5.
The rate stabilization would be the 1.5 million.
1.5 million, yeah, for the rate,
Right.
for the rate stabilization, yes.
1.5 on the fund, being able to cover everything, and then PCA raising it to
Raising it to 2.5.
I'm with Todd in terms of the 2.5.
0.5.
As it stands right now, I mean, if we can look at it going forward too, and then if we need to have this discussion again,
And again,
we're open to that.
I honestly think it's from I don't know what perspective. I mean, technically, by letter of the law, anything under what it calculates out is, less than, if
Right.
it calculated at 3.3 and we did it 3.5, I think we'd have a problem. But I think if we're under that, I think we just need to understand.
That just stays in reserve, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And just like when we originally did it in 2017, yeah, we had to do the increase, but said once we looked at it, have the rate study, to bring it back down, readjust it
Mhm.
based on the facts. So we can always look at that if the rate study comes out
And the good news with the PCA, like I say, if when the solars come on, they're at a lower rate. I mean, it can drive it the other direction as well. Right? Like I say, it did, but unfortunately, the likelihood between load growth and what we're seeing in the market in general, that's fairly unlikely. So I don't know, what is your thoughts? Greg, would you want an official motion from this body?
I want an official recommendation. What
Okay.
you guys think? I think it's important. I think I know the council appreciates everything you guys do, and you guys. I mean, you truly think about it, and they're not going to have the in depth that you guys have had, and so anything.
There's
It's
still
always
a discussion that you can have that,
yeah. We'll still have a
With
similar
this
similar
information.
discussion, but it
yeah,
what it does is it helps that you. I mean, you're all consumers, right, of this power. I live on the other side of the river. I'm not a consumer. My rates have gone up, but we're not seeing this. But
still
so
hard.
I'm just looking forward to the phone calls I'll be getting here in about 3 months. And so, which is, I mean, it's tough, right? I mean, every board I'm on, we're raising rates, and it's just tough because everything's getting hit. So I can only imagine how people are getting hit right now. I mean, I talked to one lady today who said her electric bill was $600, and I was like, holy cow, how is it? I just am blown away. And I'm sure, I don't know what type of power user they are, but I'm just like, that's a lot of money for a 1 month bill. And I'm sure there's some that are way higher and some that are less.
Yep.
So,
That we do have an interesting extremes if you looked at the numbers.
and I think if you can give us your best recommendation of how you feel you should do it, I know the council takes that into consideration big time when they're looking at this and understanding where we should be. And I think everything you said is has been right on. So, I mean, I would.
Last question is maybe way out there, but we talked about impact fees a while ago, and the increase of those impact fees or the changing of those impact fees. Does any of that impact fee relate to anything that we're talking about there, or could it relate to anything that we're talking about there for new construction or anything like that?
Impact fees have to be used for basically infrastructure to serve new load.
Well, that's actually
There are some cities that stretch it and include the generator itself in there.
Say that.
yeah, that's
You don't think we can? I think you could.
that was kind of where I was.
It all
headed.
gets blended into this,
But-
and we can have that discussion with UFS as well, but they're of a similar opinion
That it's not, shouldn't be included, or it should.
that it becomes a kind of a gray area because you can't track it. Just,
It's not specific to a project.
yeah, it's a little more challenging, I think.
See,
when
but
it gets in
I would argue, well, a park built over here is being used by other people too, and they get to use impact fees for that. So why can't we build a generator here that helps all in this area? Because it's an improvement because of this new development that's coming in. Their impact fees should help the cost
Well,
to
I-
help bring those power. So that's just my
It's a
argument.
good perspective.
But that's because
kind
I
of
do
the way-
development
the-
work. And
Yeah, I was thinking, but yeah,
That's gonna be another 2-hour meeting.
yeah.
Well, that's something that, again, UFS has done our impact fee as well as our rate study, and I think that's something that could be brought up. But it would be the fixed cost of the unit itself would be the most that could be put in there.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
So, but,
I realize that's.
but the one advantage of the biggest advantage of the unit locally is we can vary it to follow the load. It's not such a clunky block. Although when it's not running, it's sitting there and we're still paying for it. So, but, yeah, that's all great questions, and, I do appreciate the feedback, because like, Councilman Coates said, that is a unique difference between this body and the council is you guys are all on the system where I think there's only one, maybe two.
yeah, you have 3 council members, and then the mayor and 2 other council members are on the other side of the river.
So, but it does create just a little different perspective. I don't think those that aren't on the system aren't going to treat it a whole lot different, but,
And with some of this information, I think that helps them too. So hopefully they'll be able to look at that. I trust that they'll be able to look at that.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to that conversation.
So we ready for a recommendation?
Yeah, unless there's any other questions, yeah, a motion to what we wanna.
I'll go ahead and motion that we use or recommend 1.2 million from the rate stabilization fund and increase the PCA to 2.5. Is that right?
1.5?
So-
1.5.
We talked about 1.5 and then just maintaining the 2.5
Yeah,
Oh,
until the rate
1.5.
study's done or something like that.
that's kind of better than what we were thinking, but.
Yeah.
level
And I would just say
forward thinking as
authorize,
well.
not necessarily we gotta use it. We'll see what that does on the revenue side and what we got going on, so. Sorry.
I'll second that with the cat. Well, go ahead.
So how do we want to restate that? Authorize the 1.5.
Just amend your motion to change your number from 1.2 to 1.5 million.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah. Motion to change that from 1.2 to 1.5.
I'll second that.
Okay, so what we've got is a motion to authorize usage of 1.5 from the rate stabilization fund and to change the PCA to a 2.5. Everyone's understanding?
Or we'd hold the PCA.
Yeah, maintain it. I
Yeah.
like the maintain.
Yeah,
That maintain language sounds a little bit better.
2.5.
Got Todd did the first, Mark did the second. Rick, you want to start? Oh,
Saunders, aye.
Palmer, aye.
Spriggs, aye.
How's our eye?
Dinsmore, aye.
Thank you. Like I said, that's not a enjoyable next little while on some of this stuff, so.
And let's understand as this goes, because I think we're actually gonna see two waves of this. I think immediately, those that are paying monthly are gonna see this the next month or two, their bills. And then I think come January, February, you're gonna see those who have a steady,
The equal pay.
the equal pay are gonna see it.
Later,
adjust.
yeah.
They're gonna see their adjustment, so we're gonna see this probably at two levels, and then still have to address it again in February, March, when we see a rate study. So be aware of that as you're hearing things. Pass that on to the office and try to address any of those issues. And remember the other thing too is, I mean, I've got a brother-in-law down in California, and he thinks some of these rates are bad. They're
Oh,
10 times what we're talking about in California, getting worse. So, yeah, we've got some very big issues in the future that we do need to look at and continue addressing. So,
I think some of the other issues are gonna be like the chart that shows the coal that's gonna be going away. That's gonna really affect Dixie, Escalante and some other places, so.
shared in the newsletter or online, information, is that something that's going to be,
As far as the WAC,
just have the public aware of these are. these
That the
are
resources are
why
being,
this is
yeah,
happening,
yeah.
Why this is happening. to
That would
us
help.
on a
I'd-
local
Mhm.
level.
So we'll work on that, Rick. We should put something together.
Yeah.
okay.
That's made, as much as can be, public information can be, so we can be transparent with the consumer so that they're, absolutely.
And I think we can talk with Manager Red and look at something about putting something together on that but it's only affecting half the community. I mean, you are seeing an increase on the Dixie Power side, but nothing to this rate because they still have their coal plants up and running. And,
Yeah, but the one where it said in 3 or 4 years, they've got to do away with,
Yeah.
whatever it was, 70% of it or whatever it was.
then they're gonna,
Then they're really gonna get hit.
and then it's gonna jump.
They're gonna see it, but they don't have to see it for another
Yeah.
Did you send this information to us? Do we have this at all?
I have not, like I said,
Or
this
can
was
we get that?
scramble,
just
put it
through
together.
Or whatever.
pretty fast. I got the bill last Tuesday, so,
Doesn't have to be pretty.
I'll just send out a PDF of it. That's fine.
Yeah,
Great.
that'd be good.
And yeah, like I say, as far as, and we do have that weird situation where not everybody in the city is on the same system. It's well, I live on Dixie's system. Like I tell my neighbors, enjoy it while we can, because they'll be in as bad or worse shape than we are if they lose their
And
coal
I
plant.
think it'll hit harder than we're seeing gradual in Washington
you get-
side,
that'll
but
be a
Dixie's
big-
going to be just all of a sudden up there, and it's going to be a big shock to them.
And I don't blame it at all. If I had a horse like that, I'd ride it until its legs are this tall, you know. So,
Really.
you know, and really, it'd be hard for them to spend huge amounts of money to replace something that's cheap. You know, you got that old pickup that's still running. It's hard to go
Paid
buy
off.
the $100,000 truck to replace it. So, but yeah, that's just where we're at, and a lot of it depends on you know, some of the green legislation and those kind of things. And so there's not just a real easy, simple solution. And so, but the one solar with battery that they're looking into, it actually had some of the better pricing, blended pricing than we've seen on that configuration. So that'll help. It's a 4-hour battery, so it helps some, but it's still not a base load resource. So, and I don't know if it shows up. Something else that's really different than historical. If you look at this light load hours, which is at night, some of the months now, the light loads are higher than the high load hour pricing. Totally flipped upside down from what it used to be. So, and you see there's not a whole lot of difference other than during the peak months. The shoulder months, you know, you're just a few dollars difference, where before there was dramatic differences. And if I had perfect hindsight and could go back, our 5-year purchase, I would have bought a whole lot more than we did, you know, 3 or 4 years ago. But at the time, it seemed really high priced. And everybody said, I don't believe that you should sign up for that much. So yeah, so.
All right, on to regular business. UAM's report.
Well, we've spent a lot of time on the most important, and I'll just quickly highlight on the regular and on UAMPS. We've got Rachel officially. Last month she was here, but it wasn't like 2 days away. So we're glad to have her. She's figuring stuff out between illnesses and different things. She's had a few lonely days trying to figure out what the heck am I doing. And so we appreciate her, and
We're all doing
is
that.
doing a great job. However, we're still 2 linemen down, and we've made 2 different offers. One decided it was too far of a relocation, and the other one, his current employer matched or sweetened where he was at. And that wasn't his intent going in, but so we're still in pursuit of filling those vacancies. So that's a challenge, and actually will affect. Originally, on our Main Street project, we were going to have our crews do everything above ground, and when we bid it, we did a base bid, which we were originally going to do, plus to stack the steel and put the bus work, and I think we'll go that route just because of manpower needs on that project. So the Exit 13 project's moving along. Actually, the poles shipped from Monterrey, Mexico yesterday. And then hopefully they make it through customs okay. So we expect those poles to be here hopefully before Thanksgiving. And then the Main Street project did bid yesterday. We got 2 bidders. well, kind of 1.5. The one didn't bid all of the parts of the alternate, so, but I'm comfortable with both bidders, and it was about 6% higher than the estimate, which in today's world isn't too bad considering the estimate's about 1.5 years old. So I didn't feel too bad about that bid, and that'll go to council on the 9th as well. October, we ran our generators 7 days, which we've never ran in October before for the same, pricing. So we watch it. If we can run cheaper than we can buy, we will do that. Just trying to see if there's anything. The new Maverick, I'm sure seen going in, the new underground system that will serve that, and we had to relocate, or Maverick had to relocate part of it because their new tanks and they expanded the property they were on over the Chevron, and so they had to relocate some of the utilities. So those relocations are done, and so that was a really good thing to get that behind us on that. Most of the rest is standard. We really didn't have any significant outages, small ones here and there with, a breaker tripped or a connector fail, nothing too significant. Shifting to the UAMPS, probably the most significant thing there is the Nebo project. I reported last month was going to have its, they call it a major outage or a major overhaul that they do every 7 years on the turbine. It was originally supposed to last for 6 weeks. When they got in there, took the turbine out, they found damage to one part of the blades, had to send it to Texas, and so that plant won't be offline until the first of the year. So it basically doubled. So yeah, that's been my life the last few weeks. So we are, in fact, just this week, we've worked with UAMPS to get a replacement power for that, and it came in about 65 to 70 is what we're anticipating, which is probably just a little higher than what Nebo would have been. But again, won't be exposed to the market the same way if we didn't replace that. So, and again, that's one of those plants. It's about 18 years old, 19 years old. So I think we're starting to see some of the older life part of a mechanical machine. This one the problem was on the steam turbine, not the combustion turbine. Valve's running well. I think in the other, we talked about the Red Mesa Steel Solar, the Enchant going away. There's one project that I probably can't say a whole lot in a public meeting, that if UAMPS can secure the PPA for that, would be really good for us. It's a good price, and would be available, I think it's August or September of next year. And so they're negotiating that. It's an existing plant that the current off-taker has decided not to renew. And so that's one that has the advantage of being quick. The only downside of that is everybody's short. So there's like 50 megawatts available, and they'll probably have 150 megawatts of interest. So it'll dilute what we can get our hands on. So, but again, right now I'll take anything that I can afford at any time. So, CFPP, and the main thing on that is reported they haven't run the official Class 3 economic competitive test yet. reviewing the numbers, trying to come to an agreement with New Scale on what those numbers should be. They were gonna call a interim meeting, and I haven't got a report on that, so I'm waiting to hear on that. So we expect that it'll probably fail the economic competitive test based on preliminary looks. So that'll mainly give us a decision point, and we'll see what comes out of that negotiations and stuff, and we'll bring that back. As far as the physical side, keeping things on track, I think are going really well. Sean does a great job with a lot of good experience. New Scale's on track for the standard plant design and the standard design application through the NRC, which would be this, I think it's next month they submit that to them. And what that does is when our COLA goes through, they'll say, we've got one of those. And so they've already reviewed a lot of that, and it'll make our process go, believe it or not, faster, even though it seeming like it takes forever to get through that process. And so they're working on, developing the specs, detailed specs for the long lead time items, getting ready for the COLA, which would be next year. Looking at opportunities to identify at least work that could be done prior to the NRC approval. That's the limited work authorizations that would be non-nuclear related, like grading and administrative buildings and things like that, that don't have to go through the NRC. Field activities, pretty much they've concluded the geotech. Most of that's collecting weather data is what's going on there, and groundwater and things like that. The geotech analysis did find that they expect that there may be some voids that may have to require additional grouting and fill when they do that. Again, that'll be reflected in the cost estimates. So really, as far as there's two sides to that project. I think what Sean's doing and keeping it moving forward is great. Then we've got the ECT issue, and then the subscription still is an issue that we have to address, and that'll probably come to a head here and come back to both bodies in the next month to 2 months. I would anticipate that we'll be having to make a decision whether to proceed or not, and what the parameters to do so. Say, unfortunately, I think it's a great project, but the subscription is my biggest concern on that. It isn't so much on, I mean, there are concerns on the getting it constructed. There's parts of it that are first of a kind configuration, but I think those can be worked through. But you continue to see, who was it mentioned, the BYU professor says, hey, I've got this new way to do it. I think we're seeing in general that more and more people are realizing without that piece to the puzzle, getting to carbon-free emissions is not going to work. So that's a positive side, but we still aren't seeing a flood of people say, sign me up. So we got a lot of cheerleaders, but not a lot of players. So that's, and then really the next phase is where the costs start to ramp up very quickly. When the COLA hits, it goes up fairly fast, and then obviously once you get to a decision to construct, it goes really fast. So we got to make sure that we're protecting the city and meeting our needs too. So there's not a lot of alternatives out there that we've just spent the last hour and a half or so talking about. So
They're that big, that large.
correct, and that it's a base load type resource that you can count on and 24/7, whether it's rainy or snowy or whatever. So that's a real abbreviated on the other two, but I think we've had enough fun for one night. So if you got any questions on anything, let me know, and we'll get, I'll get this PDF to Rachel tomorrow and she'll send that out. And it'll be basically identical to what I'll probably put in there, add to the slide presentation for the council that what you guys recommended, that, and then they'll have that in the packet that goes out this week. So it's on the 9th, and you're more than welcome to come, and you may you can come stand up with me and help. Like I say, it's one of those that you're just not excited about, but we have to keep it on track too. So thanks.
Questions, concerns? Okay, I think our next meeting is December 6th. So mark your calendars for that. And motion to adjourn.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
I'll second.
Briggs, aye.
Hauser, aye.
Saunders, aye.
It's my. Okay, thank you, everyone, and thank you, Rick.
Yeah, thank you, Rick. Thank you, Councilman Coates.
You didn't catch the flu, did you?